You do.
We are being recorded and we are going live with episode 7. All right. Zoom, take us away. There we go. All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome, welcome. This is the Extrovert's Guide to COVID-19. And I am Jen Hicks here with Jen Pinson. And this is our episode 7 of this. I can't believe we've been doing this for 7 months together. Wow.
I know. It's so crazy. I'm trying to figure out how to host a watch party. It's giving me different options than usual. So I just shared it onto my page. But that's working because for whatever reason, I didn't get host a watch party.
Oh.
So I'm hoping, let's see. Turn down. Okay, hang on. Maybe this is how I have to do it.
The joys of technology. It was a little different for me going live today too. So as Jen gets set, just want to welcome all of you who are joining us this morning. We chose to still hold this today. We've been meeting with you all here on Facebook Live on the first Thursday of the month for the last 7 months throughout this pandemic to share a little bit of our journeys of self-awareness and growth and how we've been living out what we continue to learn about ourselves. And Jen and I had a conversation about whether or not we wanted to hold this Facebook Live today. And we decided we really needed to because this is what it's about. It's not about being self-aware and living that out on the easy days. It's how do we do this every day and how do we do this on really challenging days and weeks like this one? And so we decided to focus today with you all on cultivating compassion, not only for ourselves, but for others. And we thought that that would be a great focus for our conversation today as we all are in this liminal space. And a shout out to Leslie Henry. I love Leslie Henry, and I've been having this conversation about the liminal spaces during this pandemic time of these in between, the discomfort of being in the unknown and in between spaces. And we've been in a lot of those over the last 7 months, and we're in that right now as a country. And for many of us as individuals, there's a lot that is being held in that liminal space. And so we just want you to know that you are welcome joining us today, however you're feeling, wherever your emotions and thoughts and bodies are at. We hope that you will, if you join us today, take this moment to just check in and maybe be a little more compassionate to yourself as you do so. Yeah. Welcome, Jen. Are you all set up and ready to go?
I am. I think the watch party is working. I just shared it on my page and I hope that my friends and people can see it. And if not, then whoever's here joining in, feel free to engage with us in the chat. So I am set.
Wonderful. Oh, well, we wanted to share, should we start with just a couple of resources that have kind of grounded us in our own knowledge of compassion and self-compassion and compassion for others to share with you all as we get started. So, some of the foundation of what grounds these conversation for us. A couple of the ones that I brought today that we'll be talking about are, first of all, a book called Self-Compassion by Kristen Neff, which is really one of those kind of foundational works for us on compassion here in our culture and in our country, the proven power of being kind to yourself. And this is the book actually then that Brene Brown quotes when she talks about compassion in The Gifts of Imperfection, which as a perfectionist has been a really powerful book for me. And so those are a couple of the books that I'm grounding us in. And as we get started today, wanted to just come back to something they both mentioned in those books of when we're talking about compassion, what we're talking about. And there's really 3 key components that they identify. One is that self-kindness. And so again, if you're joining us today, I really hope that you will be practicing some of that self-kindness to yourselves, whatever that looks like for you, because that's going to be different for each of us and different for even ourselves on different days. Common humanity, which is, I think, a really important piece to name and practice this week and this day and this moment. And then mindfulness too, and just that awareness of being present with ourselves, however we are right now, and being compassionate in this moment with however we're doing. And so we're going to start there. And I'll put the links to those books in my chat too.
I love that. So I am coming to you guys from home today. Normally when I'm here with Jen, I'm in my office, But today I felt like because of yesterday just not feeling 100% and just kind of I wanted to work from home and just really wanted to be comfortable today. I felt like that's what I needed. And as you know, something Jen and I have talked about, especially Jen, is honoring kind of where you are and honoring what you need. And I realize that, you know, I'm fortunate to be able to work from home and kind of make these choices and stuff. And I hope, you know, a lot of our listeners and stuff are able to kind of make some of those choices of where you are in terms of what your needs are and whatever it is that you can adapt into that. And so I am working from home, and so apologize about the casual background. But I have two books that I wanted to share with today. So one of the ones that Jen and I were talking about is The Happiness Trap. So I bring that today to talk about with compassion, because the happiness trap, I love the fact that, well, I don't love the fact, but it talks about how in society we always believe that everything has to have a happy ending. Movies and books and a lot of things, as we grow up, we learn about this happy ending and this happy ending. And I feel like when we talk about happiness, we get lost that happiness is the positive emotion and other emotions are the negative emotions. And I think labeling emotions as negative is really kind of it's toxic and it's harmful to look at emotions as negative when we are emotional beings and we should be feeling a complex emotions. And so when we talk about compassion, understanding that other people are sitting in other emotions aside from happy, and it might be sadness, it might be anger, it might be grief, and we often need to meet our fellow friends, or you know, the fellow man, in being compassionate of what their emotions are, and then also being compassionate with ourselves in terms of feeling other or all emotions, not even other emotions, just all emotions, and understand that in one given day we might feel multiple emotions, and that's okay. And so one of the things I like about this is it talks about that kind of that happiness, and how fake that happiness can be, and how harmful that just constant striving for happiness can be. But then it also talks about how to diffuse our thoughts and how to change our thoughts to help ourselves, you know, being able to kind of stabilize emotions that we have. So there's a lot of things that are great about this book, and never did I think that I would tie it into compassion, but I think the whole book is very much about compassion.
Yeah. Before you go to the next one, Jen, can I comment on that really quick? So I love a couple of the really important things. And Jen and I were just talking, we love these conversations because they just inspire and motivate us. And we hope maybe they will you too. One of the important things I think that Jen talked about is being compassionate and mindful of our own emotions, whatever they are.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we've talked a lot in the past in these Extroverted Gens shows about personality inventories and the ways that we learn and understand ourselves. And as an Enneagram 1, I can tell you that I'm really good at stuffing those tough emotions down. You know, and in my clinical work, I'm all about encouraging the clients to embrace and accept and get to know all of their emotions. And we talk about healthy emotions rather than positive or negative, like Jen was talking about. We want to move away from that stigmatizing of some of the more challenging emotions as unhealthy or negative, because it is important for us to be sad. It's healthy for us to be sad. Right now, it's healthy for us to be, for some of us and many of us, to be scared. Right now, it's healthy for many of us to be angry or frustrated. These are healthy emotions. And so I think having those components of compassion, of being mindful of those emotions and being kind and honoring them within ourselves. And then also, as Jen said, that common humanity piece of the compassion, of being able to recognize that others are also dealing with these complex emotions right now too, and not trying to focus on this toxic positivity. And I mean, y'all know me, right? I'm generally, and you know, Jen, we are generally, pun intended, very positive beings. And that comes from a place of joy, and that comes from a place of authenticity from us. And it also, I believe, comes from the place of being able to name and acknowledge all the emotions that we experience together with that it's not just one thing. And I know for me right now, living in this time, and you all know that my motto has been grief, gratitude, grace, that there's been a lot of that complexity, and especially this week, of being able to hold a lot of the gratitude. Like Jen mentioned, you know, both of us want to name and acknowledge the privilege that we have in being able to do some of the things that we've been able to do to be compassionate with ourselves this week. It is
Yeah.
absolutely a source of privilege that, we can be from home, that we don't have to go out, that we can take care of ourselves, and that we have the support around ourselves to do that too, which is a huge piece of that, the community that we need around us to help us be able to care for ourselves, to help us be able to be kind to ourselves during these times. So we do want to name that privilege that exists there. And so being able to be mindful of that, and then to be able to practice that self-kindness in whatever it looks like for us along the way is so important. I do want to say hello to a few of our friends who are joining us today. It's so fun to see you all hopping into the chat. So thank you for being here, Emily. And Emily, happy belated birthday. Sending love to you too. Welcome to the 40s. They're awesome. Beth, hello. So glad you're joining us. Grant, hi. Glad you love the pun. Bonnie, so good to see you all. Thank you so much for being here today, friends. And I'll just invite you to share in the chat as we're chatting together, as Jen and I are sharing some of the ways that you are practicing compassion for yourself, for others right now, whatever that looks like for you, being mindful of it is whatever works for you.
Yeah.
That we really need to honor our emotions, the complexity of them, honor the privilege that many of us have right now, and then be mindful of how we move forward from here with self-kindness, with that compassion for our common humanity together too.
Kind of going off of what you've said too about that compassion, I think even in the pandemic, as we're seeing a lot of people, struggling with their schedules and stuff, I also
Mhm.
acknowledge the privilege that I kind of had yesterday at the fact that I was able to be at home with my daughter when she and I, neither one were really feeling 100%. And just how fortunate I felt in the aspect that like I was able to stay home from work. I shifted my work to be able, I did a telesession at home with her, and I was able just by I gave her headphones is what I'm looking
Mhm.
for, and an iPad, and just kind of sat her down, and she, I was doing sessions and did a few other things at home yesterday, right here actually the same spot, while she was just entertaining herself. And I felt really privileged just in that too, and the aspect
Mhm.
that I was able to do that, because I think about all the families that might not be able to just take off a day if their kid is sick. And right now with COVID, schools have stricter policies, and they should, in terms of, what kids are allowed to be at home. And it's very different in terms of just the way that the work life dynamics are, just in general.
And I think that's a great place too to practice compassion for others. And Grant, I have to give you a shout out because Grant, I know, has been working on practicing gratitude in the midst of all this too, and has inspired me to continue practicing gratitude in the midst of all of this. And that is one of those ways that we can also extend that compassion to others, to recognize our common humanity. And I know even for me, my husband and I are out walking the dog on election night, and a delivery driver had stopped to rearrange their food in the back of their car, and we said hello from a distance, and I just simply said, thank you so much for working tonight. And he stopped and he looked at me, he's like, thank you so much for saying that. And it was like this beautiful moment of, we are common human beings. We have this common humanity. We share this humanity. We can share compassion for each other in this moment. And particularly Jen and I were talking a little earlier, for those of you who feel less safe walking outside your home this week, for those of you who are really living in very valid fears of what the future might look like. We want to name and acknowledge our privilege. We also want to extend that compassion and help support each other, because as we were talking about, right, we need that support, like Jen talks about all the time with harmony. In order to live in harmony, we need support around us, and we can extend that to each other in some really, really simple ways that don't take more than a kind word or an acknowledgement of I see you.
Yeah. So your story makes me think of when I went to vote. So by nature, I am generally a very impatient person. I hate saying that because I feel like that's the opposite of compassion, but I want this done now and let's do it now kind of. And I acknowledge that about my personality, and I, actively find ways of finding to be impatient, whether, sometimes I hate waiting in line for things. And so I find things to entertain myself or to distract myself while I'm in line. Or, I have figured out ways to, taking deep breaths while, I figured it out. So when I went to vote, the printer in my line got jammed, and like people in another line were like going, and the lady was like, "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I'm so sorry," and just kept apologizing. And it's like, really, it's okay. It's not a big deal. And and as like the third or fourth person in the other line got their ballot before I did, she just kept telling me, "Thank you for being patient. Thank you
Yeah.
for being patient." And I could have gotten upset, and it probably would have ruined her day and mine, because
Yeah.
acting that way. And so it's just like a moment of like the fact that she had to thank me for being patient. She had to thank me for that. And it was just this like this aha moment for me, that it's like, wow, how would have other people would have behaved in that? How would have I behaved in that moment had I not been mindful of my own impatience, years ago, and
Mm.
really, worked hard to, validate that. We're no one's perfect. We all have things that we have to work on.
Yep.
And so like I've been very, very mindful of that impatient feeling that I have.
Yeah. And I think that's such a beautiful example for those of you who are just joining us. And a shout out to Rochelle. We're so glad you can join us today. We're chatting about compassion for ourselves, compassion for others, ways that we can practice that through self-kindness, through sharing this common humanity, and through our mindfulness of the ways that we interact. And Oh, yeah, support. Beth just shared in the chat, my daughter has really been struggling since March. We've been able to help her manage as best we can. Her kindergarten teacher just reached out to help us find resources through the school, and I'm so grateful for that support. We need that, right? And we need that support, not only to be able to be kind to ourselves, but to extend that compassion to our family, to be kind to others, to reach out, and to care for ourselves, to care for others, not only during this time, I just want to name this, but also moving forward.
Yeah.
Because we know that we have a lot of work left to do, y'all. And so this is not going to be resolved when the election results are resolved, which may not be for a while. We still have work to do moving forward. And a lot of that work is around practicing compassion for ourselves and practicing compassion for others. I do want to acknowledge, and I think this is important, something that Brene Brown talks about. As we talk about compassion today, know that that includes setting really healthy boundaries.
Mm.
And so in the gifts of imperfection, one of the things that I really appreciate that she talks about is being compassionate isn't about allowing people to just treat us however, and to be able to put up with whatever. Um, and it's also not about jumping to shame and blame. So Jen, I think your story was a great example of that, where you could have jumped to just blaming the person and being impatient and all of that. Being compassionate is about, right, kindness to ourselves, embracing this common humanity, being compassionate to others, being mindful in the moment. And as Brene Brown talks about, having these really healthy boundaries, holding people accountable. And that's a way that we can show compassion for people, and that we can show compassion for ourselves, is by making sure that we are taking care of ourselves and that we're taking care of ourselves. And so if you're joining us today too, know that as always, when Jen and I talk about these things, we're embracing the full on complexity of it, right? That this isn't as simple as, yeah, just be nice to people. That's not how this works, right? Sometimes the most compassionate thing that we can do for ourselves and for others is to say no,
Yep.
or to have
Um,
consequences. Yeah, go for it, Jen.
Before you and I jumped on, I was telling you that I kind of had to take a break from some of my friends because, like, the really extreme political right now is really hard for me. I have strong political stuff, but I don't necessarily always voice all of my politics. And when it comes to like, I'm very well informed, and I know, where I stand on things. And it's been hard for me on both ends, to see extremeness on either side, because I do tend to kind of fall in the middle grounds a little bit, and it's been difficult. And it doesn't mean that that I disagree with their people's feelings. It doesn't mean that I disagree with necessarily what anyone is saying, or that I condone necessarily. There are definitely behaviors that I morally don't think are right. But at the same time, it's honoring myself and it's honoring my own feelings. And I've had to, I actually told somebody, it's like it's like I love you, and it's like I think that you're a wonderful person, but right now I just can't have these conversations with you. And right now I can't, it's like I just can't be the same friend to you in this moment right now that I have been in a while, because it's like I just need to take a break. And I felt
Mhm.
really kind of bad saying that in a sense, but it was like I just really needed space. I really needed to be able to feel the emotions that I felt and really be in the moments that I was feeling. And I didn't feel like that engaging in all those conversations were really productive for me.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily saying no, but it's setting that boundary and saying, hey,
Mhm.
I need space. And I think it's really important that we are able to communicate our thoughts and our feelings. And I feel like for me, communication is one of my strengths, and it's something that's extremely important to me. And having even if I had somebody who said that to me, it's like I would respect that boundary too.
Mhm. Yeah. Thanks to those of you who are joining us. If you're just joining us today, we're talking about compassion, about extending compassion to ourselves, self kindness, being mindful of what we need in this moment, about extending compassion to others and embracing this common humanity that we share. And we're also embracing the complexity of all of this, doing so with healthy boundaries and doing so on the tough days as well as on the days when it's a little bit easier to be compassionate and kind. And also just naming the privilege of being able to do a lot of this and the need for support to be able to do this. So we're glad that you're joining us today. Feel free to add in the chat some of the ways that you are practicing compassion today, either for yourself or for people around you. I know I was really inspired seeing some of my friends out taking food to people in voting lines on election day. Yeah, it was awesome. Megan Masco, shout out to Megan Lover. Had like pictures of in her car, just like the huge boxes of like snack packs of chips and things like that to take to people. And there's been all of these ways that people have been reaching out to connect, to share this common humanity, to support each other, whether that's in your physical presence, whether that's in how you interact on social media, whether that is connecting with the people closest to you, right? Touching base with your family, touching base with your friends, making sure people are okay, checking in to see if people have a self-care plan right now, what they're doing to care for themselves, and then doing the same for ourselves. Jen and I are both therapists. And so we were talking earlier that we're really great about doing a lot of this stuff for the clients that we get to work with, extending that same compassion and mindfulness and self-kindness to ourselves, and prioritizing that can be challenging sometimes. And it is so important. My husband often laughs when we were just out walking the dog this morning and talking about I haven't been feeling well this week and I'm still needing to do some extra self-care around that. And he's like, you're actually having to practice what you like tell people about all the time. I said, yes, it's a good thing. This is something that I know a little bit about. And just so y'all know, it's still challenging for me too. I have to remind myself to breathe. This is a continual process of learning and growing. It is not, self-care. And we just had a great on my MT Mentor podcast. We just dropped the episode with Ami Kunimura this week, which is such a perfect week if you need a little more Ami in your life. Like she is just full of self-care and self-compassion and resiliency and so much wisdom around that. And I'll put the links for that podcast in the chat too. That it was such a beautiful reminder, though, of how we need to practice those for ourselves. Yes. And as Beth said, I need reminders to practice compassion for myself, too. And Ami and I both talked about that. She and I present on self care and these topics all the time. And both of us have had to be really mindful about how we practice that during this pandemic, how we practice that this week. Both of us had to be mindful of making sure that we're giving ourselves those reminders, too. I'll put those links in the chat here.
Couple things like Beth, with stuff going on with your kindergartner, I can completely relate. So when I was in Mexico, my whole day and a half in Mexico because of the hurricane, I got a call that my daughter was having a really hard time at school, and so my daughter had been having a hard time leading up into me going to Mexico, which was really hard for me as a single parent. It was really hard for me to travel without my kid, but it was kind of a work function. But I got a call that she was really struggling at school, and so we've set up some good counseling and social work things at school. So I think it's really important too that during this pandemic and during these things that we're very mindful of our children's needs and what is going on in our children's lives, and setting up as many supports as we can. So like my kids have all kinds of different supports and structures, and that's part of this finding harmony that I
Mhm.
like to talk about instead of balance, that harmony of
Yep.
bringing in the supports. If you're a musician and you've not heard me talk about this, you know, you can't create harmony alone. So as musicians, we know that. And so even if it is just your voice, multiple times, you're using something to get that to happen. So even if your harmony isn't necessarily utilizing people, but it's utilizing resources, you cannot create harmony alone. You have to have other people.
Mhm.
You have to have things that support you. We are not meant to go through this life alone. And, you know, I say that too, being a single mom and being a single parent, like you know, there's so often this, like, if you're single, you're alone, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, and there's also this mindset of, do you need a partner or do you not? You know, that sort of thing. And it's okay to be single. It's okay not to have a partner, but we are not meant to go through life alone. You know, whether it's your family, whether it's your friend, whether it's a community support, whether it's your work support, whatever it is, we need support in places. And, you know, in terms of utilizing things around us, there's obviously a lot of things when it comes to self-care and a lot of the things that we can kind of bring into stuff. But I think all of these things too, you know, finding the people that help us and hold the emotions that we're feeling, and the people that are compassionate. And Beth, when you're talking about too that, you know, sometimes it's hard to be compassionate, being gentle with ourselves. And I think we've all heard that, talk to yourself the way that you would talk to somebody else. Um,
Mhm.
you know, in some of my work and journey, like in the last couple of years and stuff, I've had to go back and like I've like gone back and looked at pictures of myself and like forgiven myself for things that I had held with me for many years, and shown myself that compassion for, you know, for myself. And I think that's something that we often do forget, is how to be compassionate
Yeah.
with ourselves. And so it's, you know, it's coming back to that. How do I talk to my friends? How do I hold compassion for others? And trying to hold that same compassion for yourself. And
Mm.
not, that's the perfectionist in us too. It's, we hold ourselves to a higher standard than we hold other people. And often that's that lack of compassion as well.
I love that, Jen. And I love the idea of extending compassion to our past selves as
Mhm.
well, right? There's that Maya Angelou quote that I absolutely love, that we do the best that we can until we know better. And then
Yes,
when we know better, we do better. Right?
absolutely.
And
It's
for
so
many of us, we tend to get stuck in that shame blame game of not being perfect in the past. And now that we know all this, being really realizing what we could have done better in the past, and being able to extend that compassion to who we were in the past,
yes.
be able to forgive ourselves for what we need to forgive ourselves for, to be able to be mindful of what we need in the present. And I love that idea of that continuum of support, not only for ourselves, but for the other people in our lives. And, you know, Beth, I think you had some great examples of that in the chat, of talking about the support for your daughter, and also talking about the support that you and your coworkers gave each other, taking a long walk outside over lunch yesterday, and taking that time with each other, of, you know, creating that community of support. And Natasha Thomas talks about this a lot, which I really appreciate, about the importance of community care, and making sure we have that community around us to support us. And that's going to look different for many of us. And again, that can be one of those places of privilege too, of, you know, I can afford a therapist,
Mhm.
and some of those resources that we have, being willing to, though, step outside of ourselves a little bit to create those communities where we need to create communities. But I
Yeah.
think sometimes, particularly when I work with students who are transitioning into the working world, coming from being in school where you have a cohort around you all the time, and then going into this professional world, can be really challenging, because all of a sudden we need to create our own cohorts around us.
Mhm.
And sometimes that can be coworkers, sometimes not. Sometimes having coworkers as that cohort is healthy, and sometimes not. And so I think that that realization that in some places we need to actually actively create those communities and reach out and connect, in order to create that support system around us. And as Jen said, to find the people in our lives who will hold the space for all the emotions. If you were on with us earlier, we were talking about the complexity of the emotions that we carry, and being able to hold the space for all that, and to know that whatever we're feeling today, there are feelings. They
Mhm.
are. They're not right or wrong. They're not positive or negative. They are. And to be able to allow us to feel those, to not stuff them down like us Enneagram ones love to do, but to allow us. And I think I've shared in the past, but I'll share again, Brene Brown's podcast, Unlocking Us. There was a really powerful episode of completing the stress cycle, that talked about that need to process all those complicated emotions, to allow ourselves to process them before we move forward. And I think that's really important, as Jen has talked about, rather than going into that toxic positivity of just ignore it and pretend it's all okay.
Mhm.
And this is complex. It's not binary, right? We're living in the and here. And so, yes, as therapists, there might be some times where we need to say, you know what, I need to process that, but I can't do that now.
Mhm.
Or like in the podcast, they talk about, I need to process that, but this is not a safe place for me to process it now. Right?
Absolutely. Yes, and I love Brene Brown when she talks about when she feels shame, that there are certain people in her life that she just can't process her shame with. That
Mhm.
there's certain people that have certain things, and so I can't remember what book it was in, but she was even talking about she had done a presentation and it didn't go as well as she had
Yeah.
wanted it to go, and that she didn't tell her husband, and it was like years later before she told her husband, and then her husband had to ask her. He's like, "Well, why didn't you tell me?" And she said, you weren't my person that I needed to tell that to.
Yeah.
And she talks about, when she uses her sister and when she uses like her professional colleagues and stuff. And so understand that like when there's something that's going on that we start to feel shame, that doesn't mean that the person who's the closest to us is the person that we process that shame or what it is that we feel. We go to the people who show us the compassion that we need, who aren't going to just dismiss our feelings and tell us to get over it and move on or whatever it be, but the people who are going to hold that space with us, the person who's going to understand where we're coming from. So with Brene Brown, she had talked about her husband is she has a very positive and healthy relationship with her husband, but when it came to that embarrassment and that shame that she felt centered around her work, he wasn't the person that she felt like could hold that space with her. And that's not anything that we should feel bad about, but it's something that we should, kind of understand. And that's, that need for that community, that need for that harmony and that need for those people is that we might have people to support us in one part of our life and a completely different set of coping skills, or even the people that support us in a different part of our lives. And so
Mhm.
that's okay too.
Yeah. And I think that's really that important piece of mindfulness when it comes to compassion, of
Mhm.
knowing what that looks like, how we practice it on one day is going to be different than another day.
It's
And
true.
who we might need to reach out to on one day might be different than another day. And so I would just invite those of you who are listening to consider who and what you need, what self-kindness looks like for you today. Jen and I were talking, some days it is for me getting out and walking, moving. Some days it is connecting with people. Some days I've got a great nest made on the couch right now where I've been spending some time lately. Some days it's nesting up and putting on a movie. As one of my wise colleagues has said, some anxiety that I can control, right? To be able to watch that plot happen and go, okay, this is going to resolve and it's going to be okay. Sometimes that's what it looks like. Sometimes it looks like getting out and helping to promote voting, helping to advocate for others. Sometimes it looks like protesting. Sometimes it looks like being on social media. Sometimes it looks like not being on social media.
Yeah.
Sometimes for me, it means really integrating my yoga practice in the asanas and the movements. Sometimes it means integrating the more meditative pieces of my yoga practice. Being aware that whatever self-compassion looks like for you today, we would just really encourage you to be mindful of that, to do what you need to do to take care of yourself today and to take care of yourself this week and moving forward. This is not going to resolve quickly, and you know all of the challenges of our country are not going to be solved at the end of an election.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of work to do. This pandemic is not going to be over at the end of this election. We have a lot to still go through together and walk through together, and being mindful of how we need to care for ourselves and be compassionate with ourselves and connect and be compassionate with others as we move forward is so important.
Yeah.
As we finish up, Jen, did you want to share that other book? Are there other thoughts you want to share as we kind of end the half hour or so of our time here together today?
Sure. I just want to say that it's okay to cry and it is okay to
Mhm.
show outwardly emotions as well. And so, everything that Jen just said is so spot on. But just to even go further with that, that it is
Yep.
okay to not be okay. And it is
Mm.
absolutely okay to feel grief and
Yep.
understand that not everybody is going to understand your grief cycle because we all grieve differently and not
Yes.
everybody is going to grieve the same stuff. And so our level of
Yes.
grief through this is going to be so different. And it is okay that you grieve in a way that you grieve, and there's
Yes.
nothing wrong with it.
Yep.
And if that means you cry, you cry. You cry,
Mhm.
you cry, and you cry.
Yep.
Don't let anyone ever make you feel like the way that you handle your emotions is wrong. As long as you're not being harmful to other people, and as long as you're not being harmful to yourself, you grieve and you feel those emotions in any way that you can.
Yes.
So the other book that I have is Becoming Your Best. It's the 12 Principles of Highly Successful Leaders. One of the things that I feel like this book does is it teaches compassion from the top to the bottom. So it's a great book to really set your mindset into a leadership mindset, but being compassionate for everybody around you and giving yourself compassion as you grow as a leader as well. One of the things that I feel like this book, it's a slow read, and I've read it multiple times. I've read chapters multiple times. I feel like it really goes through the principles of being a good leader, and really how to get others that would want to follow you and hold that space as long as you're continuing to be your authentic, vulnerable self throughout the principles as you learn them.
I love that. And I think that's so important for any of you who are listening, for those of us that are in leadership roles, to understand that this is something we need to model,
Mm-hmm.
right? That we need to model compassion for ourselves, for others. And I know that when I've talked with fellow business owners, it's one of the things that they often talk about is sometimes they sacrifice their own care for their employees or for the people around them. And one of the pieces we've talked about is how important it is to model caring for yourself. How important it is to model. We talked earlier about boundaries being part of compassion. You know, if you are a leader out there, you don't have to respond to messages 24 hours a day. Actually modeling that you can have boundaries in your life, that you can show compassion, that you can take care of yourself in your life, that is a really healthy thing to model for the people around you. And it gives them permission to do the same thing,
Agreed.
which is so important in a culture that is based on white supremacy and patriarchy and capitalism, that we have these models of there are other ways to be leaders. There are other ways to do business in our world. There are other ways to interact with people. And that is true even on social media.
Yeah.
Place where we sometimes forget about that common humanity, where we sometimes forget about sharing compassion for each other. We can have boundaries and we can be compassionate at the same time, even on social media.
Yes, I 100% agree. And the other word that comes to mind is empathy. Like we can be
Mm,
empathetic and we can hold the same space. And so like I feel like I've held a lot of space for my employees and this week. And
mhm.
held a lot of space for my employees this year with the pandemic. And I know I've got a lot of feedback from my employees of, feeling safe at work and feeling safe in their jobs and feeling secure where they are. And I've been very vulnerable with them this year
Mhm.
in particular, because I feel like the vulnerability is important this year. And I feel like this year alone, my team is more connected now than we have been in the past. And I think a lot of that is because of the vulnerability that we all are sharing with each other, because, through this pandemic and through everything as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Jen. I'm going to go ahead and put in the chat the link for Career Driven Mom if you want to learn more from the wisdom of Jen. Because I am just so grateful because every time we do these extroverted Jens, I learn more, and I have the opportunity to share in the wisdom of this incredibly strong, beautiful, courageous woman here. And so, Jen, do you want to tell people just a little bit more about Career Driven Mom, and if they want to learn more from you or about you, where they should go?
Sure. So, Career Driven Mom is kind of the finding harmony in your career, parenting, and you. So, it talks about strategies for self care, strategies of parenting at home, and then also balancing a career. So, for me, I feel like my career is kind of been one of the things that have kind of changed me and helped me grow through realizing I was in a toxic relationship and helping me kind of get out of that by leaning into my career. And leaning into my career helped me be a more confident woman, which has helped me be a better mom. And then all of the strategies of self-care and caring for myself has kind of composed all of that into one little package of finding my harmony between these three things. So all three are very important to me and kind of important factors of my life. And so Career Driven Mom is to help, give strategies, create a community for women to come together who are in their careers, love their careers, and also, really enjoy being parents and trying to find that, that I hate the pesky word balance, but that harmony between everything,
Mhm.
but then also realizing that you're important as well. So I kind of took a little bit of hiatus from the podcast, but I have a few coming out here soon. But we're still have our community page over our Facebook page. And so feel free to join it.
Thanks. And if you didn't know, Jen is also a published author,
Yes.
best-selling author. Can we say that? Can we say best-selling author on Amazon?
It is, and so yes, my first book, I was co-authoring a book called First Class Life Anthology, and so I'm one of the co-authors. Just launched in October, so you can get a copy. They right now we are doing pre-sales, and so they will be in by the end of the month, and you'll get an autographed copy if you want to purchase one from me. I will autograph it and send it, and you'll have it right around the end of the month. So, and then after that, you're welcome to buy anytime, and I should be able to ship them a little bit more quickly. But right now, like I said, pre-orders. And yeah, I'm working on a second book that's called Career Driven Mom that I'm hoping will come out in 2021.
That is so awesome, Jen. And I know that there's a specific link to use to order that book.
Hmm?
So I want to make sure that we get the right link for that. So maybe we can put that in the chat afterwards and
Yep,
make sure.
I can put it in there. Thank
Perfect.
you.
Thank you. Oh, so
I,
much exciting stuff going on. Right. This is that living in the and.
yes.
That I think is so important that we can embrace the joys and we can embrace the celebrations, even in this time of fear and sadness and everything that is happening in our world. One of the really important pieces is being able to hold that complexity, the nuance of all the emotions that we can experience at the same time. So, thank you all for being willing to join us in this liminal space today, for being able to join us in the complexity and to just hold space with us today. We hope that you will take some time to be mindful of what compassion for yourself looks like today, to be mindful of what compassion for others might look like today, whether that is reaching out or setting boundaries or whatever it might be. And we just really hope that you will care for yourselves, not only today, but every day as we continue to move forward from here.
Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next month.
See you next month. Take care, everybody.